Week 3 gave me my first real reality check. I started the week at 332 pounds, and when it was over, I was 335. That's a 3-pound gain, after losing 18 pounds during my first 2 weeks. Seeing that number go back up definitely wasn't what I wanted, but I'm still down 15 pounds overall, and I'm starting to realize this journey isn't going to be a straight line. So instead of letting one number on the scale define the week, I started looking at everything else that was going on. And that 3-pound gain is where the numbers start to tell a much bigger story. Nutrition actually stayed pretty steady. I averaged 2,182 calories and 179 grams of protein per day, and hydration stayed between 120 and 160 ounces. Sleep was a different story. Apple Health shows I averaged only 6 hours and 16 minutes a night this week. I still made it to 2 physical therapy sessions, and recovery continued to be slow and steady. Nothing dramatic, just continuing to build on what I was already doing. But this was also a stressful week personally, and then an update broke my tracking app. I lost the detailed history of what I ate, although thankfully my daily calorie and protein totals had already been saved elsewhere. So when I saw that 3-pound gain, instead of immediately assuming I was doing something wrong, I started looking at the whole picture. And that's where week 3 really started changing how I looked at this journey. So with the bigger picture of week 3 in mind, I wanted to look a little closer at what was actually happening throughout the week. I was still on 2.5 milligrams of Zepbound, taken once weekly on day 1. My estimated medication level started at 1.92 milligrams, jumped to just over 3 milligrams after the injection, and then gradually declined through the rest of the week. What I find interesting is that my experience didn't follow one perfectly smooth line with that decline. Day 1 started pretty well. Food noise was basically non-existent. Appetite suppression was mild, and my stomach seemed to be settling down. By day 3, though, diarrhea had returned along with some minor sulfur burps. That improved through day 4, and day 5 ended up being completely symptom-free. Then, toward the end of the week, food noise and appetite picked up slightly before settling back down again. I also had some very mild heartburn and belching on the final day. Overall, though, the side effects stayed pretty mild this week, and there was another change happening at the same time. I started experimenting with fasting, and both attempts actually went longer than the 12-hour goal I had set for myself. But the other part of this week that really caught my attention was what was happening with my nutrition, especially after seeing that 3-pound gain on the scale. And when I looked at the nutrition numbers, they really didn't support the idea that I had somehow completely fallen off track. I averaged 2,182 calories per day this week. On the chart, you'll see calories written as kilocalories. That simply means kilocalories, the calories we normally talk about when we're talking about food. That was about 142 calories per day, higher than week 2. But my protein also increased. I averaged 179 grams of protein per day, up about 12 grams per day from last week. And hydration continued to be one of my more consistent areas, staying between 120 and 160 ounces per day. Food-wise, breakfast was usually a meal replacement shake. Lunch was often my chopped chicken bowl with eggs, string cheese, avocado, bacon bits, and a little ranch, with things like tomato or olives mixed in on different days. For snacks, I leaned heavily into protein. Things like dried edamame, protein bars, shakes, recovery shots, meat sticks, and those no-bread PB&J squares. And yes, there were regular foods in there too. One of the dinners I actually logged was meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy. Unfortunately, when my old tracking app stopped working, I lost most of the detailed meal-by-meal history from earlier in the week. Thankfully, the daily calorie and protein totals had already been preserved elsewhere, so those numbers weren't lost. And I think that's important when I look back at that 3-pound gain. My calories were a little higher, but the numbers don't prove that's what caused the scale to jump. So instead of trying to force an explanation that the data doesn't actually give me, I'm just recording what happened. And when I looked beyond food and the scale, my recovery was still quietly moving forward. And like I said, when I looked beyond food and the scale, my recovery was still quietly moving forward. I had 2 physical therapy sessions this week, both right around an hour long, and outside of PT, I got in 4 sessions on my indoor floor pedal bike, about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and 2 more at around 22 minutes each. And something worth pointing out is that those Apple Watch workouts don't tell the whole story. There's a lot of recovery work I do every day that doesn't necessarily get logged as a workout. Things like resistance bands, stretching, and using 10/EMS units on my back and legs. There wasn't some huge breakthrough this week. I didn't suddenly wake up able to do something I couldn't do the day before. It was much less exciting than that. It was showing up, doing PT, getting on the pedals, stretching, working my legs, continuing to use the walker around the house, and for everyday activities. Just repeating the work and trying to build on the progress I'd already made. The exercise shown here, the seated march, is an example of the kind of simple recovery exercise. And honestly, I think week 3 was starting to teach me something. Progress doesn't always announce itself with a big number or a dramatic milestone. Sometimes progress is simply being able to say, I showed up again today. And that idea was starting to carry over into some of the other habits I was building too. And those small daily choices were starting to become habits. This week I added something new, time-restricted eating. I started with a pretty reasonable goal, a 12-hour fast, because I didn't want to jump straight into something extreme. My first fast lasted 13 hours and 16 minutes, and the second was 13 hours and 8 minutes, so both went a little beyond that initial 12-hour goal. Eventually, I'd like to work towards something closer to a 16-hour fast and an 8-hour eating window, but I'm not trying to race there. I'll build toward it gradually and see how my body responds. Hydration stayed consistent too, generally between 120 and 160 ounces per day, and I continued focusing on getting plenty of protein. Then there's all the recovery work we just talked about. The resistance bands, stretching, TENS, and EMS. Those things don't necessarily show up as workouts on my Apple Watch, but they're still part of what I do every day. And I think that's where the real lesson of week 3 started coming together for me. The scale went up 3 pounds. A few weeks ago, seeing that number might have made me question everything I was doing. But this time, I could look at the rest of the picture. I was still 15 pounds down overall. I was doing my PT. I was exercising. I was working on my nutrition. I was staying hydrated. And instead of giving up on my routine because of one weigh-in, I actually added another habit. That's what I mean when I say sanity has entered the chat. I'm starting to understand that this can't be about having a perfect week every week. It's about building something I can actually keep doing. Consistency over perfection. Small habits repeated over time. And with week 3 behind me, I think I'm finally starting to redefine what a successful week actually looks like. So what does a successful week actually look like? If I only looked at the scale this week, I could call week 3 a failure. I gained 3 pounds, but after looking at everything we've just gone through, I don't think that's what happened at all. I'm still 15 pounds down overall. I averaged 2,182 calories and 179 grams of protein per day, kept my water between 120 and 160 ounces, continued physical therapy, and my recovery work, got 4 sessions in on the pedal bike, and even started building a new fasting routine. And maybe the biggest change this week wasn't physical. It was how I reacted to that number on the scale. Those huge losses during my first couple of weeks felt incredible, but I'm realizing they likely included substantial changes in water weight. I can't expect the scale to keep dropping like that every week. Going forward, 1 to 2 pounds per week is the kind of healthy, sustainable progress I'm looking for. Some weeks might be more, some might be less, and apparently some weeks might even go backward. But one weigh-in doesn't get to decide whether I'm making progress. That's what week 3 taught me. I'm grateful for the progress I've already made, for the ability to keep working on my mobility, and honestly, for the stronger mindset and new habits I'm starting to build along the way. Heading into week 4, I'm going to keep building the fasting routine towards 16 to 8 as I tolerate it. Stay consistent with hydration and protein. Keep doing PT, exercise, and my daily recovery work, and focus on choices I can actually sustain. Consistency, patience, progress. 3 weeks down, and I'm still showing up. If you've made it this far, be sure to give me a like and follow along so you can keep up with my progress. And let me know in the comments what you think, or if there's something about this journey you'd like me to cover. This is my life, my recovery, and my experience, and I'm documenting it 1 week at a time. Small steps today, big changes tomorrow, 1 step at a time. We keep going.